Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, May 2nd, 2025. The Labor Department releases the April jobs report. 177,000 jobs created. Unemployment rate stays at 4.2%. President Donald Trump sends Congress a budget proposal for fiscal year 2026 with $163 billion in cuts to domestic programs. We'll talk about it with USA Today White House correspondent Bart Jansen. President Trump calls for the defunding of PBS and NPR. In this week, where the White House celebrated the president's first 100 days in office, we'll play some of the news conferences from Democratic members of Congress as they introduce bills on issues they support, specifically gun control and LGBTQ plus rights. And Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney holds his first news conference since his Liberal Party's election victory, previewing next week's meeting with President Trump in Washington, talking about trade and tariffs. We'll talk about that with Reuters Canadian correspondent David Ljunggren. Wall Street Journal reports the U.S. labor market steadily added jobs last month, despite jolting tariff announcements that many economists expect will give way to a trade policy-induced slowdown later this year. The U.S. added 177,000 jobs in April, Labor Department reported Friday, above the gain of 133,000 jobs economists polled by the Wall Street Journal had expected to see. The unemployment rate, which is based on a separate survey from the jobs figures, held steady at 4.2%. That was from the Wall Street Journal. Labor Secretary Lori Chavez-DeRemer was on Yahoo Finance TV.
Well, we blew it out of the water last month, so this does not surprise me. This is exactly what I knew the president was going to do. But 40,000 more jobs, again, exceeded expectations. So this is not a wait and see anymore. The golden age is here. This is what we're experiencing. This is what the president wanted when he put this team together, and we're working hard to deliver for the American people.
I know you have been on the ground observing the labor market firsthand, talking to employers, talking to workers. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? And how does that stack up with the official data?
Well, I think it's measuring exactly to what the president said. As I'm on the ground, my 50-state tour, visiting with businesses here right at the Department of Labor, we're seeing the excitement and the investment that they want to make. I mean, look at the companies that are coming and negotiating with the president, almost $8 trillion worth of investments. That's only going to grow the jobs market. That's what's key for me, is to make sure that we have that skilled workforce. So as we're on the trail, almost 500,000 new jobs have already been created in this administration, and we're going to see more and more as we continue down the months ahead. So I'm excited to report on these things, and then I'm excited to go back and continue on the road and talk about these things, because that's just, people get excited about this. They want to be investing in the workforce, and we want the American worker to know that they're secure and they're safe and they have jobs to choose to.
Labor Secretary Lori Chavez-DeRemer today on Yahoo Finance TV. Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, ranking member on the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, putting out a statement. Today's jobs data shows the labor market is still slowing down. In 3 months, Trump and his chaotic tariffs shrunk our economy and raised prices, slowed private sector job growth to its lowest point in 9 months, and pushed continuing jobless claims to levels not seen since the pandemic. American families cannot afford this chaos to continue. That's a statement from Senator Elizabeth Warren. Stephen Myron, chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, spoke with the jobs report on Bloomberg TV today.
I think there's been an ongoing disconnect between the hard data and the soft data, and the hard data continue to perform very well. 177,000 jobs last month, a beat of 40,000 jobs. That's the president's second jobs day beat in a row. And on top of that, you've got 11,000 construction jobs, expanding construction sector in spite of the president's crackdown on the border, disproving critics again. And the hard data continue to be okay. And I think it's worth emphasizing that these data represent the period after the president's historic actions with tariffs on April 2nd.
So, Stephen, we need to get into that, because there are some people that we've spoken to that worry about the next report. They think that this could show up in the May report, and I've heard the words downside risk repeatedly. Are you confident that some of that's avoidable?
So, look, given the historic scope and speed with which the president acted to put American workers and firms first for the first time in decades, it shouldn't be surprising if there's some accompanying volatility, and that extends to financial markets that we've seen, and it could extend to economic data also, as companies sort of substitute activity from one month to another. That remains to be seen. But so far in the hard data, we're not seeing any real evidence of that to be the case. And as you pointed out, there are various soft data sentiment indices that look not as good, but those tend to be influenced by financial markets, and there's been enormous volatility there lately, as you guys are aware, and they tend to be influenced a lot by politics. But historically, the correlation between those and activity has been weaker in the last few years than it would have been, say, 10 years ago.
Stephen Myron chairs the White House Council of Economic Advisors today on Bloomberg Television. Associated Press writes that transportation and warehousing companies added 29,000 jobs last month, suggesting companies have built up inventory before imported goods are hit with new tariffs. Healthcare companies added nearly 51,000 jobs, and bars, restaurants, almost 17,000, and construction firms, 11,000. Factories lost 1,000 jobs. Labor Department revisions shaved 58,000 jobs from February and March payrolls. That was from Associated Press. Wall Street reaction, the Dow up 564, NASDAQ up 266, S&P up 82. Article at USA Today, President Donald Trump unveiled a budget blueprint with $163 billion in spending cuts to non-military programs that mirror the reductions he's made from firing federal workers and dismantling U.S. government agencies. Joining us now is the reporter who wrote that story, Bart Jansen, White House correspondent with USA Today. Thanks so much for being with us. How much detail is in this budget proposal on where those cuts would come from?
Well, it's still pretty high level. This sort of document gets nicknamed the skinny budget because traditionally when you have a new administration coming into office, they need to be given a little more time to sort out basically where current spending is going and then also where they want to, put their own flag on their own priorities. And so this is quite a bit later in the year than you'd expect to see the initial budget proposal from a president. And it's also quite a high level, just basically agency figures rather than getting into the weeds at this point. The House and Senate appropriators are eager to really get into the details of this through hearings in the coming weeks.
This is in the context of $1.7 trillion in discretionary spending, so about 10% proposed cut. When was the last time spending went down year over year at the federal level?
Boy, I don't. You're going to stump me on that one. But they do say that this would be a dramatic reduction in that non-military spending to something like 2017 levels. It would be. It depends on which piece of the numbers you're talking about. The non-military cut was about 10%, but because they see defense going up, it's overall the discretionary would go down somewhere in the vicinity of 7.6%. There's also just to warn you, there's a bit of a fuss about the additional funding that the Trump administration is proposing for the Defense Department. They say that they're adding $119 million to put them above the $1 trillion, but that's being handled separately through a parliamentary maneuver called reconciliation. And it's probably not worth getting into the technicalities of that, but appropriators like Susan Collins, the Republican atop the Senate Appropriations Committee, and Roger Wicker, the Republican from Mississippi, atop the Armed Services Committee, are both saying that because they're handling it through reconciliation, defense spending is remaining flat this year or would into the next year, and that against inflation, it would actually be a loss. So there's quite a bit of dispute about how defense spending will be handled.
Glad you brought up reconciliation. As people are waking up to this headline of this skinny budget proposal with cuts, they've heard about the budget reconciliation process and cuts happening there. How do these two fit together?
Well, it's all different pieces of the same big machine, the jalopy, the Rube Goldberg machine that Congress is going to be firing up and probably debating for the rest of the year. You've got three different big pieces. One is reconciliation, which, again, is this parliamentary maneuver, but if they can approve it, which is basically their version of the budget blueprint, the sort of the parameters, the goals for what they want to accomplish, if they can approve that, then they get a sort of a permission slip to have the Senate approve spending measures with just a majority. And so that's a huge advantage instead of having to overcome filibusters with a 60-vote majority. Then you've got the actual spending bills, and there will be disputes over that. And then there will also be a massive tax cut package because they want to at least extend the Trump tax cuts from the first term so that they continue. Otherwise, they expire at the end of the year. And he's ambitious enough to want additional tax cuts on things like Social Security benefits. And this skinny budget doesn't even begin to address tax cuts and how they affect revenues and basically how much money do you have to spend and how big is your deficit going to be. So you've got three different pieces. Reconciliation is sort of the first thing that has to move because that gives you the permission slip to approve spending bills easier. And then you'll see the spending bills moving and the tax cuts will be overlapping with the spending bills.
We're talking with Bart Jansen, White House correspondent with USA Today. Two more questions from your article. You note that even Republican lawmakers who lead Congress have begun voicing concerns about cutting some of the rejected programs. So will the cuts have some pushback?
Well, that's the key. Again, just to mention this reconciliation, basically reconciliation is to allow the majority to do what they want without worrying about what the minority would have them change. And so it's basically a question: can Republicans do everything they want by themselves, not including Democrats in their negotiations? But so that's what highlights if they have Republican opposition, then that becomes harder to overcome. For instance, Wicker is a Republican and has concerns about the defense spending. Collins is a Republican and has concerns, say, about the LIHEAP cut, a cut in heating oil subsidies that affect low-income households. A $4 billion cut. It's a fairly small program, but she's upset about it, and she's head of the committee that will oversee spending. So those looking for where Republicans might have concerns about the different proposals is where the big disputes will happen.
And a final question, you note that this proposal for budget cuts comes after courts have blocked many of the cuts, but if Congress were to approve them, would that override the courts? How does that work?
Yeah, I think that would be the expectation. Right now, basically, this budget is trying to codify, trying to make permanent the cuts that we've been seeing at, getting rid of tens of thousands of probationary workers, getting rid of 20,000 people overall at the Department of Health and Human Services, the dismantling of the Department of Education or the U.S. Agency for International Development. Each of those things in different ways has been thwarted, at least temporarily, in the courts. Of course, if Congress just said, oh, yeah, we don't want to fund the Department of Education at all tomorrow, then, yeah, that resolves the court case because Congress approved a law. Part of the thing that has kept these programs running is because they are statutorily required. You need Congress to say they don't want to fund that anymore. So that's part of what the debate will be about is will the lawmakers that up to now have approved all of these programs in these grand compromises, they approved the U.S. Agency for International Development. They've approved, since the Reagan administration, the Department of Education. And will they basically trim their sails and make these cuts that Trump has attempted, but that have been thwarted temporarily, at least by the courts? That's one of the big dramas in each of these agencies that's going to be playing out during this budget debate.
Bart Jansen, White House correspondent for USA Today. You can find his articles at usatoday.com. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
This is Washington Today, and House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, putting out a statement about the president's budget proposal. President Trump's plan ensures every federal dollar spent is used to serve the American people, not a bloated bureaucracy or partisan pet projects. Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State Appropriations Committee ranking member, with this statement, President Trump has made his priorities clear as day. He wants to outright defund programs that help working Americans, while he shovels massive tax breaks at billionaires like himself and raises taxes on middle-class Americans with his reckless tariffs. Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana, was interviewed on Fox Business Channel today about spending cuts in the context of that reconciliation bill.
Your colleagues want to spend money to extend the tax cuts and execute President Trump's agenda, but it's going to cost money. So where are the cuts in the Senate identified?
Well, so you're asking me now to prejudge a process that we're in the middle of. And one of the things you do in these committee hearings, you say, wait a second, is this fat? Let's just get rid of the fat. But is this good? Is this kind of, if you will, marrow and bone and muscle? We want to preserve that. That's the process you go through. If it takes a little bit longer, that's the reason it's taken a little bit longer. I'll go back to my theme, though. If we're creating an economy which works better for the American people, that's President Trump's promise, then that's the process you have to go through to separate the fat from the good stuff.
Well, this is all very practical comments that you're making, and I agree with all of that. But why is it that the House was able to identify $1.5 trillion in cuts and the Senate was only able to identify $4 billion in cuts?
That's total process, because it's just total process, just in terms of how we're going to deliver it. But the committee I head, the Help Committee, we've identified $300 billion in cuts. So that's just the committee that I head. And so I know the other committees are doing the same because I actually serve on one or two of those other committees. So those cuts will be made.
Do you think you'll be able to get at least $1 trillion in cuts all in all?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, let's imagine. You mean in our government, there's not like $1 trillion of stuff that shouldn't be going out the door?
That's right.
Not stuff essential to having a better economy for our fellow Americans, but stuff that just kind of like, you know, goes to this person to his particular benefit, but not for the rest of us. Yeah, we can identify that.
Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana, on Fox Business Channel today. Story from Politico. Public media executives are pushing back against President Donald Trump's late Thursday executive order seeking to strike federal funding for NPR and PBS, arguing it is unlawful. Trump's Thursday order directed the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private nonprofit that Congress awards more than $500 million annually to fund public media, to, quote, cancel existing direct funding to the maximum extent allowed by law to NPR and PBS. But in a statement Friday, Patricia Harris, the president and CEO of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, wrote that the organization is not subject to the president's authority. She wrote Congress directly authorized and funded the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to be a private nonprofit corporation wholly independent of the federal government. That was from the Politico article. NPR CEO Catherine Marr was on Comedy Central's The Daily Show on Wednesday about the possibility of these cuts.
NPR, PBS is often it's part of the conversation. I think there's been a lot of push for many, many years to take funding away. But in like 2025, the criticism from the right is what do we need public funds to go towards NPR for? What is that argument? People are getting their news from all sorts of people. Most people just get their news from the TikTok feed from their neighbor. So why do they need their taxes to go to a place like NPR?
Well, there's also a very big difference between disseminating the news and gathering the news. And what we do is we do news gathering. It allows for people to then be able to come in and add their spin and their commentary on it. So I have no problem with TikTok influencers or other people resharing that news. I think that that's actually great. But we want them to have credible sources of news to begin with, to be able to base that work on. But more importantly, I think the big misconception is that this money goes to NPR or to PBS. The reality is that the vast majority of funds in public broadcasting resources go directly to local stations. So I'm talking about, I did a little research. I'm talking about WK.
Oh, this is, okay,
yes.
All right. Bring that NPR share. Oh, I get it.
I think it's WMUK, WKAR, or the stations where you grew up.
Kalamazoo, Michigan. Yes,
there you
exactly.
go.
Yes,
exactly.
WMUK. Indeed.
And so stations like that, they get a significant part of their funding comes from public funds. And that really matters, especially when you get into rural parts of the country. So I was in Asheville, North Carolina recently, as we all know, devastating damage in Hurricane Helene. They have enormous radio towers that broadcast across that topography, because it's like this, it's the Appalachian Mountains. Same thing's true. Eastern Kentucky. You get out to the Rocky Mountains. Same thing is true. Huge swaths of the country. That's expensive to maintain. We cover 99.7% of the country with our broadcast coverage, and that allows for Americans to have access to news, even in places where news deserts are growing, where disasters happen.
NPR CEO Catherine Marr on Comedy Central's The Daily Show on Wednesday. Late Thursday night, President Trump putting out an executive order ordering the defunding of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which sends money to NPR and PBS. The order reads, in part, unlike in 1967 when CPB was established, today the media landscape is filled with abundant, diverse, and innovative news options. Government funding of news media in this environment is not only outdated and unnecessary, but corrosive to the appearance of journalistic independence. Order also says which viewpoints NPR and PBS promote does not matter. What does matter is that neither entity presents a fair, accurate, or unbiased portrayal of current events to tax-paying citizens. Catherine Marr putting out a statement today that begins, NPR is unwavering in our commitment to integrity, editorial independence, and our mission to serve the American people in partnership with our NPR member organizations. Last night, the president released an executive order seeking to cease all federal funding to NPR and PBS. We will vigorously defend our right to provide essential news, information, and life-saving services to the American public. We will challenge the executive order using all means available. President Trump spoke about his relationship with the media, all media, at Thursday night's commencement address at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. It was during his call for the graduates to help build America, no matter which profession they choose.
To the journalism majors, of which I've had a lot of problems with. I must be honest. I'm not sure I like them. No, I do. But you're really leading a very thing, because we need a great and free press. We need a brilliant press. They're like a watchkeeper. They're very important, and you can go out and take it down a new track, help save the country. So important. Your task is so important, and it's to build a media that Americans can trust. And remember, the people of this country, they know the truth when they hear it. That's why the ratings, the approval numbers of the media are so low. We need those ratings to be 100%. We have to be able to trust our media. They say you have to have that. You need strong borders, and you need really free, fair, clean elections. You need those things, but the media is a big part of it.
President Donald Trump, part of his commencement address Thursday night at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Associated Press writing about this. President Trump offered some encouraging words and advice for graduating students at the University of Alabama on Thursday in a speech interspersed with impressions of transgender weightlifters, accusations that judges were interfering with his agenda, and attacks on his predecessor, Joe Biden. The Republicans' jolting speech was standard fare for Trump and well received by the crowd in deep red Alabama, which backed him in all three of his presidential runs. That's from Associated Press. By the way, President Trump will be giving the commencement address at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point on May 24th. University of Chicago's Institute of Politics held a discussion today with a panel of journalists about President Trump's first 100 days. Here's a question from the audience and the answer coming from Zeke Miller, Associated Press White House correspondent.
Hi, my name is Maya, and I'm a fourth year in the college. I want to build off the first question, which was, it seemed like you guys were kind of jumping around directly addressing the issue of Trump's authoritarian tendencies. And as journalists, do you feel that maintaining objectivity makes it difficult to take a clear stand on issues that may view as threats to democratic norms based on previous administrations? And this is because I do feel that there is an agreement of his anti-democratic policies that falls on all political sides of the aisle. And by trying to stay unbiased, are you doing the country and consumers of your media a disservice?
Zeke, you want to answer that? I think, free and open societies need facts. And we need to be, our news needs to be, treated, or needs to be consumed by people across the political spectrum for our societies to function. I think, this is not me speaking for the AP, but just, any news organization, I think, if we were to say this person, X politician is a blank or whatever the thing is. People who have a preconceived political position or view of that politician will view things, will view our journalism differently. Our job is to, certainly at the AP, is to give them the facts so that they can judge for themselves, so they can go back to their kitchen tables and have conversations, or dining hall tables and have conversations with friends and family and people they see at the corner store and engage in the civic discourse. And they need, we can't, it's a very dangerous thing if we get to a place where news is not accepted as fact, and facts are in dispute. And our job is to try to reach as many people as we possibly can with those facts. Are we going to be perfect every time? No. It's a human enterprise. There will be criticism of everything we do, and that's fine. That comes with the territory, and we're okay with that. And some of these are judgment calls, and again, we may make incorrect ones from time to time. And one of the things about journalism is, when we make a mistake, we correct it at equal or greater volume than the initial error. And that's something that you often don't see from people who come at things from who aren't in journalism. They exploit those errors for their own purposes. So it's a long roundabout saying that you raise important questions about journalism, about media more broadly, about our society. I don't know that journalism is the answer to those questions. I think those are broader societal questions. It's a part of it. And I think from where we stand and what our view is, and our role in this process is that we want to provide that baseline for civic discourse to the extent that we possibly can, for as long as we can, to as many people as we can.
Zeke Miller, White House correspondent for Associated Press, on a panel with journalists at the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics, looking at President Trump's first 100 days. Story from Reuters. President Trump said on Friday he planned to strip Harvard University of its tax-exempt status, setting up another potential legal fight with the Ivy League school amid his wider crackdown on elite universities and the U.S. education system. Trump said in a post on his social media platform, "We are going to be taking away Harvard's tax-exempt status. It's what they deserve." He didn't specify when that might happen. Harvard, in a statement, said the move would be unlawful and unprecedented. There's no legal basis to rescind Harvard's tax-exempt status, the Boston area school said. The unlawful use of this instrument more broadly would have grave consequences for the future of higher education in America. It would also cut money available for student scholarships, medical research, and technological advancements that drive economic growth, Harvard added. That was from Reuters. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, posting on X, "The Trump administration is cruelly and unjustly weaponizing Harvard's nonprofit status. I'm standing with Senators Ron Wyden, Jeff Merkley, and Elizabeth Warren to fight for the Treasury Inspector General to investigate the IRS's and the administration's potential criminal activity against Harvard." But Congresswoman Mary Miller, Republican of Illinois, posting on X, "Harvard has weaponized its tax-exempt status to cultivate a generation of radical elites who despise America and actively target conservatives. This institution must be stripped of its tax-exempt status and cut off from all federal funding." Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea. It's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Another Reuters article, Prime Minister Mark Carney said on Friday he would be in Washington next Tuesday for what he expects will be difficult but constructive talks with U.S. President Donald Trump, who he has accused of trying to break Canada. Carney, fresh from a victorious election campaign focused on standing up to Trump, said the two neighbors need to create new security and defense ties. Trump, who muses about annexing Canada, has imposed tariffs on some Canadian goods. That was from Reuters, and coming up, we will talk with the reporter who wrote that story from Ottawa. First, here's some of Prime Minister Carney's news conference. I note the first 10 seconds of this clip are a little hollow.
On Tuesday, I had a very constructive call with President Trump, and we agreed to meet next Tuesday in Washington. Our focus will be on both immediate trade pressures and the broader future economic and security relationship between our two sovereign nations. My government will fight to get the best deal for Canada. We will take all the time necessary, but not more, in order to do so. In parallel, we will strengthen our relationships with reliable trading partners and allies. Canada has what the world needs, and we uphold the values the world respects.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney at a news conference in Ottawa today. A reporter asked him about the trade negotiations with President Donald Trump in light of the president literally wanting to end Canada's status as an independent nation.
The White House's public position has continued to be that Canada should be the 51st state. You yourself have said that Donald Trump is trying to break Canada. Considering all that, how can you expect good faith negotiations when you travel to Washington next week?
Look, I think first I've had the direct conversation with him on whatever day it was, Tuesday, I guess it was, a couple of days ago. And we agreed to have those negotiations. Very clear discussion between us, as I said, very constructive. I would say the time allocated to our meeting and the seniority of he's the president, so that's as senior as you get, but the other members of his administration who will be assisting at those meetings suggests the seriousness of the discussions. Again, do not expect white smoke out of that meeting. There'll be white smoke probably later somewhere else in the world this month, but do not expect that. But so that's the first thing, is just the level of the direct dialogue, the discussion, the level of people there. The second point, I'll make it quickly, and thank you for restricting the question so others can get in, is that he respects, as others who are good negotiators, and he's one of the best negotiators, they respect strength. That's why we're building Canada strong. There's lots of reasons to build Canada strong, but the point is, and I will make this point repeatedly, we have more than enough to do here at home. That point about we can give ourselves more than the Americans can take away is absolutely right. We can have a bigger boost to our economy, to incomes, to jobs, by focusing on building one Canadian economy, by building these nation-building projects, by focusing on getting productivity up, by reducing government waste, by driving investment in this country. And so that is a good in and of itself. We're going to focus on that while we have these negotiations with the Americans. And if the negotiations with the Americans take longer, so be it. We've got more than enough to do here.
Joining us now from Ottawa, Canada, to discuss the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's news conference, his first since the Liberal Party won re-election, is David Ljunggren, correspondent with Reuters Canada. Thank you very much for being with us. The Prime Minister said he'll meet with President Trump in Washington next week. Tariffs obviously on the agenda. What did the Prime Minister say about how he'll approach this discussion?
He was pretty blunt. He said that he expected the conversations to be difficult but constructive. He said he wasn't pretending the discussions would be easy. He said, quote, there'll be zigs and zags, ups and downs. So he wasn't sugarcoating it. Mr. Trump is an experienced negotiator. Mr. Carney has acknowledged that on more than one occasion. He's going in a realistic mood, trying to make clear to Canadians that there aren't going to be major successes right away. But what's interesting in his approach compared to the previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is that there's no real antagonism. Justin Trudeau almost took delight in provoking President Trump, and their relations are terrible. And it's clear that Prime Minister Carney wants to put this relationship on a much more professional basis.
Have the two ever met before?
That's a good question. Mr. Carney, a couple of months ago, said they had met on the sidelines of G20 summits and other international organizations. So I'm pretty sure they have met before. Mr. Carney has said that without being totally specific as to how, but this certainly will be the first formal meeting between the two since Mr. Carney entered Canadian politics in January.
And what is the state of the tariff issue between the countries? It's been a couple of weeks this has been playing out.
That's an excellent question, and I have to say, to be honest with you, I'm rather confused because every day we look at this question, something has changed. Now, the United States announced yesterday that there would not be tariffs on Canadian-made auto parts that fell inside the remit of the USMCA trade deal. There are still tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminium and other goods. And it was interesting today, Mr. Carney was asked in French, is it a prerequisite for you that the tariffs have to be lifted before proper talks start? And he didn't really answer that. He kind of sidestepped the question. Now, he's always made very clear that Canada's countermeasures on about $60 billion worth of U.S. imports, they're going to stay on until all U.S. tariffs are lifted. He seemed to be leaving open the possibility that talks on the new security and economic relationship he wants could start while the tariffs were still in place.
You said the Prime Minister wants to have a new approach when dealing with President Trump versus predecessor Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. But Prime Minister Carney has been sounding like this is a moment that's not just about President Trump, that there's no going back in U.S.-Canada relations. Something has changed. Was that the sense from the news conference?
Yes, he underlined what he has been saying all along, although he didn't use the same emotive language. I mean, he has repeatedly referred to what President Trump has done as a betrayal, and that there is no going back, and that the two sides will now have to create a new relationship, but things will never be the same again. Now, that's interesting. I mean, looking at it from a kind of a broader historical perspective, I mean, barely 45 years after Germany prompted World War II, relations between Germany and all the other European states were just fine. So whether it is the case that in 20 or 30 years' time relations are still constrained is unclear to me, at least. But he has made clear that he thinks Canadians have been too complacent in the last few decades. The Canadians have taken the U.S. for granted, that the Canadians have thought that the U.S. would always be Canada's best friend. And this has been a massive punch in the face. I wouldn't, under any circumstances, downplay the anger which people inside government here feel. This has been a huge shock. And Mr. Carney today came out and repeated elements of his plan to make Canada less reliant on the States. Now, in the short term, I mean, Canada sends 75% of all its exports to the States. So in the short term, that isn't going to change. But he is absolutely determined to try to do his best to form closer trade links with other countries around the world just to reduce the reliance on the States.
We're talking with David Ljunggren, correspondent with Reuters Canada. The Liberal Party was not popular until this tariff issue came along. And so now that they've been reelected, but under a new prime minister, how might policies other than the tariff issue, the domestic issues in Canada, change?
Well, he's made clear that he wants to spend billions of dollars building up Canada's infrastructure. He wants to spend billions of dollars trying to figure out a way of getting oil exports to the coasts opposed to the States. The challenge right now is that the Canadian oil production is largely landlocked. So virtually all Canada's oil goes south into the States, and it is sold at a discount. So the Canadians are losing money. So he is trying very hard to kind of reconstruct, shall we say, the Canadian economy so it can get more of its valuable exports to both coasts. But this is the world's second largest country, and to get exports of energy to both coasts is going to be exceedingly complicated and take an awful long time. And the challenge for Mr. Carney is that, having been elected on a platform of A, standing up to Trump, and B, rebuilding and refocusing the Canadian economy, it could take a long time before some of the things that he wants to do will come to fruition.
And final question, I guess the opposition needs a new leader.
Possibly not, because just in the last few minutes, the leader of the largest opposition party, the Conservatives, who actually lost his seat on Monday, it has just been announced that another legislator from the party is selflessly stepping down, so the leader of the party will run in his parliamentary district, and it's a very safe one out west. So there had been some doubt as to whether Mr. Poilievre, the leader of the opposition party, could survive having lost his seat, but one of his colleagues is stepping down, so he'll be back.
David Ljunggren is the Canada correspondent with Reuters, joining us from Ottawa. You can find his stories at Reuters.com. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And on the subject of tariffs, another Reuters article, Beijing is evaluating an offer from Washington to hold talks over U.S. President Donald Trump's crippling tariffs. China's Commerce Ministry said on Friday, signaling a potential de-escalation in the trade war that has roiled global markets. The U.S. has approached China to seek talks over Trump's 145% tariffs, and Beijing's door was open for discussions, the Commerce Ministry said. The U.S. should be prepared to take action in correcting erroneous practices, in quotes, and cancel unilateral tariffs, the Commerce Ministry said in the statement, adding that Washington needed to show sincerity in negotiations. Reporting from Reuters. This is Washington Today. President Trump and the White House held a lot of events this week to mark the first 100 days of the new administration, highlighting the president's agenda on the economy, border security, cultural issues, and other issues. At the same time, Democrats in Congress were holding news conferences to reintroduce bills with some of their priorities. Here are two of them from the week: assault weapons ban and LGBTQ plus equal rights. Fox News reported Tuesday that U.S. lawmakers are continuing to advocate for gun control by pushing an assault weapons ban proposal. It shall be unlawful for a person to import, sell, manufacture, transfer, or possess in an affecting interstate or foreign commerce a semi-automatic assault weapon. The assault weapons ban of 2025 stipulates it also includes the same prohibition pertaining to a large capacity ammunition feeding device, but the measure would grandfather in those who currently own such items. That was from Fox News. The House sponsor, Congresswoman Lucy McBath, Democrat from Georgia, spoke at a news conference.
At a time when we are fighting on countless fronts against attacks from the Trump administration, we must not lose focus on our mission to end gun violence here in America and to save lives. I came to Congress because I lost my son due to gun violence, the senseless act of gun violence. In my advocacy to prevent more of these tragedies from happening, I've met scores and scores and scores of survivors and heard story after story of the change that we need because of the carnage of assault weapons and the harm and the damage that they cause. All too frequently, these are the weapons of choice for school shooters in America, and they are disturbingly easy to access. This is uniquely an American problem. Assault weapons were designed for one purpose only: to carry out massive lethal attacks by sustained rapid-fire shooting in just a very short period of time. Truly, these are weapons of war made for simply the battlefield and not our streets, not our schools, not our communities.
Congresswoman Lucy McBath, Democrat from Georgia, at a news conference on Capitol Hill on Thursday. She says the assault weapons ban bill in the House has over 100 original co-sponsors. The Senate version, led by Adam Schiff, Democrat of California, has over 40 co-sponsors. An assault weapons ban was in effect in the U.S. from 1994 to 2004. Story from the Hill. House and Senate Democrats on Tuesday reintroduced the Equality Act, a landmark civil rights bill that would make sexual orientation and gender identity protected classes. The measure, which would amend a federal law that already outlaws discrimination based on race, religion, sex, and national origin, faces an uphill battle in a Congress controlled by Republicans who have long opposed it over concerns it would trample religious freedom rights. That was from the Hill on Tuesday. The Democratic members of Congress sponsoring this bill held a news conference outside the Capitol on Wednesday. Mark Takano is from California, and he chairs the Congressional Equality Caucus.
The waves of attacks on LGBTQ plus Americans, LGBTQI plus Americans, have swept from state legislatures into the chambers of Congress and the White House. We are facing the most anti-LGBTQI plus presidential administration in recent history. And for that reason, We demand that our existence be not just recognized, but protected. We demand not just the right to survive, but to thrive. We demand the same right as any other American to live freely in this country without being forced to justify our existence or prove our worth. Now more than ever, LGBTQI+ Americans need our fundamental civil rights codified into law. The Equality Act prohibits discrimination in 7 key areas of everyday life and extends to the LGBTQI+ community the same civil rights that other Americans enjoy. It strengthens the civil rights framework not just for LGBTQI+ Americans, but for all Americans, reinforcing protections for women, religious minorities, and people of color. And it says clearly you should not be denied a job, a home, a loan, or a seat at the table simply because of who you are. We cannot leave those basic rights vulnerable to a patchwork of inconsistent protections, hostile administrations, or unpredictable courts. Now, I know the sting of discrimination. I have lived it. I am the child and grandchild of Americans who were stripped of their rights and incarcerated for being of Japanese descent during World War II. As a teenager in the late 1970s, coming to terms with my own sexuality, I watched legislators in California host debates on whether gays and lesbians should be allowed to teach in public schools. Undeterred, I would later go on to become a teacher myself. And when I ran for Congress in 1994, I was publicly outed by my opponent and made the target of homophobic attack ads. I lost that race, but when I won nearly 2 decades later, I became the first openly gay person of color to be elected to Congress.
Congressman Mark Carney, Democrat from California, at a news conference on Wednesday on the reintroduction of the Equality Act. Again, from the article from The Hill, President Trump opposed the Equality Act during his first term, citing poison pills that threaten to undermine parental and conscience rights. While exploring a presidential run as a Reform Party candidate back in the year 2000, Trump said he liked the idea of extending anti-discrimination protections in the 1964 Civil Rights Act to gay people. It's only fair, he told The Advocate then. A White House spokesperson did not say whether President Trump would support the bill this time, though it appears unlikely. That was from The Hill. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.